I'll frequently hear people say something like, well, I'm a nonpartisan, or I'm an independent, or I'm right in the middle, as if that is by itself a good thing. Now, sometimes it can be, but if someone starts off a conversation that way, typically what I hear is, well, I'm too cowardly to really take a stand on issues that matter.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today we speak with two religious leaders in our community, Rabbi Abram Goodstein of Congregation Beth Shalom and Reverend Matthew Schultz of the First Presbyterian Church in downtown Anchorage. These two progressive luminaries co-host a podcast together called What Divines Us. There is a general sense in society today that religious people are conservative people. On this episode, we explore a little bit of why that is and maybe why it shouldn't be that way. After months of the East Anchorage Book Club holding Zoom events that were not recorded, we experimented with recording Rabbi Abram and Reverend Matt's event in late December 2021. However, at the time, it was decided that their episode was too controversial, which, listening back on it now, is funny, considering the much more contentious episodes we have since released. Although it wasn't recorded that long ago, this event was held while the COVID-19 mask mandate was still in place, so you will hear that discussed in the present tense.
So Rabbi Abram, rabbi of, I could say like head rabbi of Congregation Beth Shalom, but really I'm the only rabbi of Congregation Beth Shalom. So there you go. So I asked Matt if he would join me in this podcast I thought of, and we decided to call it like What Divines Us, and it kind of started as like a what our religions are about. Is where it began, but then it kind of moved into more of like what progressive clergy are supposed to do. I feel like, Matt, does that feel accurate?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It's just kind of morphed over time.
Yeah,
because initially we thought we might kind of have some points of contention and argue back and forth on things, but basically we agreed on everything, so we got bored with that. Then we're like, let's
problematic.
do something.
Yeah, when we agree, that's when we don't have any fun. But yeah, so anyways, so that's what we decided to do it. And it's just, even though it's based here in Anchorage in Alaska, we try to make the issues more sort of like national or global that we cover. But yeah, it's just, that's what we're working on, is What Divines Us. I guess, Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Reverend Matthew Schultz. I am the pastor at First Presbyterian Church right here in downtown Anchorage, and I've been there for about 8 years now. And I see Heather recognize my dog, Bo, who came in. If you are friends with me on Facebook, which many of you are, then you've seen about 8 billion photos of my dogs. But yeah, I am in a group also called Christians for Equality, and they are a consortium of religious leaders here in Anchorage, Rabbi Abram included, and it's one of the ways we try to have some impact on politics and society here in town in a way that is of faith and also progressive.
During episode 8 of your podcast, you discuss apologies. The first part was very general, and then all of a sudden it becomes very specific. You discussed an event happening at the time, which was the Jewish stars being brandished in the Anchorage Assembly meetings, and in particular, Mayor Bronson defending them. The mayor ultimately issued an apology to the Jewish community. I was wondering if you could talk about that apology from the mayor.
I happen to know Forrest, right? Assembly member Forrest Dunbar. And so I was watching the live stream, I guess kind of randomly, of one of the assembly meetings about the masks and whether to require them or not. And I just saw like a flash of a screen and I saw like, some person wearing the yellow Star of David. And I was just like instantly angry. I mean, I don't know. It's just, that's how that works for us Jews. But that wasn't the day where anything got too escalated. And Forrest and I just started talking about it. So I got sort of like, I just wrote Forrest some things. He's like, what should I say? I was like, here, try saying this. And he did. He's at the next assembly meeting. He did say that, like right at the beginning of the assembly meeting. I mean, he said essentially that this is hurtful for Jews. And that's what I wrote for him. And I submitted that same thing to the ADN for an op-ed as well, which got published that very next day. On top of that, but he said that at the very beginning of this this assembly meeting. So it's already sort of like primed. The pump has been primed at that moment, and there are still like tons of people wearing yellow stars of David as if they hadn't heard. And so that was that right off the bat was really frustrating. And then like at 11 a.m. Or 11 p.m. Sorry, the mayor made his remarks about how he felt that Jews would appreciate this people using this symbol as solidarity. And so at that moment, I got like a hopping mad. I think it's about as mad as I get. For I believe Matt, it's spitting mad. He's but yeah, I got hopping mad, if you will, and I had a choice, right? So the choice was, and I was getting ready for this, was to do like a kind of like a hit job, I guess, and to send that to ADN about how hurtful and painful this was, and make it very, very, very public about how unfortunate what he said. But then, like, you know, after I kind of like calmed down a little bit, I realized I need to talk to them. Like, if I could talk to the mayor about this situation, about what he said, and maybe, I don't know, work with him on finding a way back from this, that would be actually more helpful and more healing could occur, because that's essentially what we needed, is to heal from this problem. And so my goal was just to find like a healthy place to move forward. And I happen to have friends that work in the muni, and so with their help, I was able to access the mayor. And essentially, the way that I framed it, and not everyone agrees that I should have framed it this way, but the way that I framed it was that I'm willing to believe you made a mistake, and that you didn't mean to say it the way that you did, but it still was hurtful. And that was really helpful to frame it that way, because I let him to say, yes, I had not intended to hurt anyone, which was not what a lot of people believed at the time. I talked to plenty of people that said he did that on purpose. And I was like, well, for me to find reconciliation, I'm going to pretend that he didn't and see where we can go from there.
Well, I don't think you pretended. You made an effort to presume the best.
Presume, right. I guess presume is a better word to use. I presumed that he did that he did not mean to hurt anyone. And so I asked him, I was like, I would appreciate like a public apology. I think that'd be really helpful for the Jewish community. And I know he was getting a lot of emails from the Jewish community, because they were sending them to me too. So, you know, like, so he's definitely been feeling a little bit of the burn. And so, you know, we talked about kind of like what an apology is. Now, his communications guy, Corey Allen Young, I think he already had something kind of written up, but even kind of before I got to the mayor. And so when he like published his apology through a I don't know what you call it, just a
press release.
Yeah, a press release. It wasn't that great. It had like the if clause. If you're hurt by this, then I'm sorry. You know, and that's not really it's really not a great apology. You know, and but that night at the assembly meeting, he did it. He did an apology that I thought was good. You know, there wasn't really any excuses. He just said, I said this and it was hurtful, and I apologize. And let's move on. And I was like, yes, let's move on, please. So essentially that's so he had an example of a bad apology for sure. And then at the assembly meeting, he had an example of a good one. And so that's sort of how it went down.
So I'll just say that a point that Matt made when you guys discussed this in the podcast was that it really wasn't the mayor who made the gold stars and passed them out. It was really the people in the hall.
Exactly.
Right.
So you're right. So one thing that I told the mayor is that, like, I'd appreciate it if these people would stop wearing the gold stars. And at first the mayor said, well, these aren't really my people. Which I was like, okay. But then he said, but I know who it is who's making the gold stars, and I'll ask her to stop. And he did, and it worked. They stopped wearing the gold stars of David. So that was nice. I loved that conclusion too. And so no one was wearing yellow stars after that day, after his apology, essentially.
Right. Well, I will just say that I happened to be in conversation with a couple of Save Anchorage members last night, and they still feel that there's nothing wrong with the gold stars. So I'm just throwing it out there that this still comes up in conversation. And although the behavior changed, I think their reasoning behind it is still.
Did you see the argument between Forrest Dunbar and
I did. I watched it a lot. I tweeted it.
I found it very fascinating. Essentially, so those of you who don't know what we're talking about, essentially, I don't know who caught this on camera, but essentially there was this really incredible argument.
It was Jeff Landfield. It was the landmine.
It was a landmine. Okay, yeah. Where they so is the guy that famously like has the picture of pointing, like menacingly, like holding the star and like pointing to like I imagine it's forest. It was very, ugh. And so what argument was that like, why can't this symbol land the way that we want it to land? Mm-hmm. Right? That's what he said. Like, why? Like we intend for this symbol not to be hurtful to Jews, but to show that, the slippery slope argument, of like you do this and the next thing you know, we're in gas chambers. Essentially was the slippery slope argument that he was trying to make. And then Forrest countered with like, well, not everything lands the way you want it to, that some things land and the way that other people experience things. There was just no, people was just not hearing it. You know what I mean? And so I think that's part of it too, is that like people believe that the symbolism that they inherently believe in should land the way that they want it to, and not really understand that like we live in a whole complex society with lots of feelings about various symbols, and nothing's going to land the way you want it to if you're not careful.
Reverend Matt, I want to get you in on this conversation because in that episode, I thought you did such a great job. I think what our side, what the other side, what political people in general are constantly talking about is finding middle ground. And you talked about a different way of coming together. You know what? I want you to redo the whole thing. I want you to talk about the math problem. It was really good.
Let's do the math problem again, Matt.
The reason I went into ministry is so I would never have to do math again. So thanks.
Samsy with the rabbinical school, and yet here we are doing math, Matt.
I think we got into that by, I think Abram, you did say we found some middle ground with something. And I was like, no, you didn't. He said he was sorry. That's not middle ground. And we shouldn't be looking for middle ground, particularly. We brought up several issues. One of them was civil rights, right? You're not going to say to someone who's asking for equal civil rights, you're not going to say, well, how about we give you half of your civil rights? And when we, as a nation, when they had 3/5 of a count for a vote, that was totally wrong. Middle ground or compromises on some things is completely inappropriate. And so I think the analogy you're referring to, Andrew, is I said, if there was a math problem and they said, what is 3 + 3, right? And so everyone here knows the answer is 6, but let's imagine that the Democrats said 6 and the Republicans said 10. Well, should we find the middle ground and go to 8? Does that make 8 the best option right there? Should we all just always try to move towards each other? Or should we only always try to move toward the fact? And if we're moving toward the fact, well, we're naturally going to get closer to one another if we all keep moving toward the fact at the same time. But somehow we've gotten this bizarre, with all the two parties controlling things, we've allowed ourselves to be convinced that the middle is somehow better. And I'll frequently hear people say something like, well, I'm a nonpartisan, or I'm an independent, or I'm right in the middle, as if that is by itself a good thing. Now, sometimes it can be, but if someone starts off a conversation that way, typically what I hear is, well, I'm too cowardly to really take a stand on issues that matter. So I probably offended someone with that comment. I'm sorry, but no, wait, I'm not sorry. That would be a sincere apology.
This is your editor, Corey Coolidge, reminding you that the stories and politics that affect your friends and family the most are local. Get them involved by sharing your favorite episode of the East Anchorage Book Club podcast with them. And who knows, this might be your favorite. But we won't know that until we get back to the interview.
So I think in Alaska, you're going to see a lot of people calling themselves Republicans and a lot of people calling themselves nonpartisans. It's much less common for someone to call themselves a Democrat or a liberal. But can you talk a little bit about the fear of being labeled with the words Democrat, liberal, progressive, any of those things?
Yep, for sure. Especially up here. It's if you want to get into office, it seems like people are saying to you right off the bat, well, you can't label yourself as progressive because you'll never get into office, which I don't know, maybe that's true. I'm no political strategist, but I think in terms of you're kind of talking about setting a tone here and what's going to be welcoming. Abram and I had a similar conversation. We had an evening of remembrance.
Anchorage Unites.
Yeah. And we were talking about, well, how do we make an atmosphere here where Republicans would feel welcome coming? And should we invite the mayor to that? And my personal feelings on it were, and Abram, I think we agreed, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my thought was, well, I don't think it would be appropriate to welcome him while he is actively working against factors that would lower the death rate.
The Anchorage Unites was a head scratcher for us for lots of reasons, because we are progressive, so we tend to attract the progressive crowd. But we want to move it to this idea that people who are dying from COVID aren't just progressive people, right? And so how do we create a program where anyone can feel welcome to come and mourn the loss of a loved one and start the process of healing from all the damage that COVID has done? Matt and I really for example, we argue should we bring up the fact that vaccines save lives at this event? To us, that's as Matt's point, that's a fact. But it's also triggering as well. And so, a lot of times facts and emotions, they're like oil and water. They don't really work well together. And so, are we prepared to trigger people, even though by saying facts that Matt and I really believe in? And that was an argument that we had, about this program, Anchorage Unites, was just as a memorial for those who passed away from COVID. And that's, for us, that's part of the problem is that first of all, why is Matt and I the only ones doing the COVID memorials that at least that we know of? And second of all, we're too progressive clergy. And second of all, how does our reputation prevent people who are not progressive, so to speak, or people who are more, I would say, on the right come, or just the very fact by who we are, mean that we're only going to get a very specific demographic, which we find kind of really sad.
It's crazy, but how are you going to create an atmosphere right now where both parties feel welcome? Because you're going to say masks are required, and then you get half the people getting all bent out of shape about it. Or you're going to, sometimes I'll have groups, if I'm leading them, I'll say, list your top 5 political issues that are the most important to you, and list your top 5 religious issues that are the most important to you. And there's almost always overlap. There's so much mixing in together that I can't host a religious event that does not somehow, if I'm being honest in my speech, that is somehow going to push somebody to feel less welcome. And honestly, sometimes that's okay. If I think about churches in the Deep South in the 1960s, would it have been possible to create an atmosphere of welcome for racist white people and also Black people that are in that community? Can you truly say, go ahead and sit down there next to the Ku Klux Klan member and both of you feel equally welcomed and cared for? I don't think it's possible to always say we're open to everybody, particularly if one set of people is actively harming the other set of people.
Yeah, but oh, Matt, now we're arguing. Hello, but Matt,
well, you're wrong.
I mean, that's an extreme example. I think there's plenty of people who don't necessarily who are quiet about sort of where they fall in sort of the spectrum. Who I think we can sort of convince to join us in something as important as having a memorial for those who passed away from COVID.
Sure, yeah, and it's going to be self-selecting to an event, and I'm happy to invite people. They can come and show up, but they just then have to deal with the fact that we will say something such as COVID is real and it's deadly and vaccines work and masks are required. And if those things push them away, then all right, that's out of our hands. We invited them and we were kind and friendly to them. If they can't live in a world where facts exist, it's not really something I can overcome.
Matt and I are talking about facts, but everything is emotional. And I think it's important to recognize that we're all sort of grieving in our own way. I mean, we don't just grieve when someone dies. We grieve when there's great change in our lives. And weirdly enough, this is the thing we have in common. COVID has changed everyone's life. We all have this shared experience. But the problem is that human beings grieve differently. as Matt and I can
Oh,
contest. Yeah, I mean, we deal with that all the time, as clergy.
I
And
cried during my sermon yesterday, Abram. I don't know how often that's happened to you, but I got crying during the sermon because I was talking about grieving events, because people have changed their weddings and their funeral plans and their graduations and all those grieving those life moments. And it wasn't in my sermon outline. I was just kind of off on a tangent and it got me all choked up. It was hard, man. But you and I are grieving in the midst of it.
Yeah. And so, to experience, I mean, and what's problematic is people don't necessarily realize they're experiencing grief. They don't understand their own emotions. And I think that can get hijacked. I really do. You're experiencing deep emotions. You're not sure what they are. You're having a hard time navigating them. You feel angry, and you hear things that are cathartic. And so I feel like that can hijack sort of how your experience. And I think it's coupled with lots of other problems too. Essentially you're in your own bubble of communication with people who only agree with what you think or say. And that enables you for you to have this horrible behavior where you treat your school nurse so poorly, And so that's something that I think not many people recognize, is how powerful emotions are and how much every individual in our country is grieving.
Yep.
I want to talk a little bit about episode 10. It's about separation of church and state. I think we can actually go back a little bit in the conversation when we were talking about nonpartisan, because I think an assumption that I always made is that the head of the religious organization, whichever religion it should be nonpartisan, and that their job is not to tell their congregation how to vote, and that they're not, that you don't go to your minister or your rabbi or your imam to find out who you should vote for tomorrow. But where I feel like it's sort of an unlevel playing field is that we, as you guys talk very well, it's the really juicy part of the podcast is when you guys talk about Jerry Prevost and Anchorage Baptist Temple and him bragging about learning his way around the 503c nonprofit requirements, that he can engage in political activity and still be tax exempt. So I want you guys to talk a little bit about what's the correct role? What do we see happening? Is where is there an alternative to Jerry Prevost on the other side? I don't know if that's a question.
I'm not sure I understand the question, so I'm just.
There's not a question. Just make it up.
Let Matt talk. He'll figure it out.
I think separation of church and state is essential and so important, but it's also impossible to define in a nutshell. One of my professors once said, if your theology can fit in a nutshell, it belongs in one. I thought that was pretty good. But the fact of the matter is, like I said a moment ago, we all preach about politics all the time. I preached in support of the minimum wage from the pulpit, which is within the current rules. That was not breaking any rules to do so. We can't endorse a candidate, but we can endorse an issue. So the current rules as they stand for what a pastor or any religious leader can do, they're super flexible, and you can get around the rules in a sneaky way easily, as Prevost bragged about doing. So, but that's both to protect churches and to protect the government. Fact of the matter is, part of what we're here for as religious entities, Martin Luther King said, we're neither the master of the state nor the servant of the state. We're the conscience of the state. And we can't be that if we're not going to be speaking out really loudly and really directly about all the important issues of the day. Abram, take it away.
Well, I feel like, as just modern clergy, we believe in social justice, and we believe that, there's always work to be done. There's always people who are disenfranchised or marginalized or diminished. And it's our job to say, let's be better. But we try not to be selfish about it too. I think that's part of the problem is Matt and I both have colleagues of people who really love the limelight, they love to talk. And they love the influence and the fame they get from being a member of clergy. But the reality is that I feel like it's our jobs are really non-tangible jobs, but it is our job to inspire, influence our, start locally, our community, to be better, to treat each other better, to hold each other up to a standard that shows that we care and that we're kind, and that people can get access to their needs, and so I feel like that's our role, like that's our job, fit in this community and in this society, as Matt pointed out with Martin Luther King Jr., it's like the state, our job is to be the conscience of the state. So and so I get really upset when I see clergy, with one example with the prosperity gospel, right? When I see clergy saying, "Oh, because I'm making money, I'm successful, and this is divine, this is right," I think that hurts me, and I don't mean like me personally. It hurts our profession, if you will.
But it's also, I think, because we've been in this world for so long of clergifying.
Clergifying. Ooh, that's a good one.
It's a guttural response.
Clergifying.
It's a visceral response for me when I see a Joel Osteen kind of guy preaching the prosperity gospel. I get nauseous. It's just so far removed from the broad witness of Scripture of what we're supposed to be doing with our faith. It just drives me absolutely batty. And that's why I'm so involved with Christians for Equality and work to bring full inclusion and embrace to LGBTQIA plus populations, because I see how my beloved Christian faith has been twisted into a weapon against them. And so I want to do my best to undo that harm it's done, because much like the prosperity gospel, it's an absolute perversion of what we're supposed to be here for.
Matt, can you just define the prosperity gospel real quick for those that have no idea what it is?
Yeah, I think the real shorthand version is they would preach a gospel that says God wants you to be prosperous and successful. And if you're praying the right way, you're going to get that. And if you're right with God, you're going to end up getting the money and the influence and the life that you want.
It's a real nutshell theology, if you will.
It really is. And, and when it comes down to it, this kind of dovetails into what you were asking, Andrew, about where is the liberal megachurch. They are out there. They do exist. They're much fewer. And one of the reasons, I think, is because we don't preach the prosperity gospel. In fact, I am more likely to tell my church that the faith will make you poor. It's just the way it goes. And that's a tough sell, man. Try gathering a group around that there's a reason there's a history of martyrdom in every religion, because when you stand up for the truth, you're likely to get yourself killed. That's the opposite of the prosperity gospel, and it's hard to rally a crowd around that. You can rally a real big crowd around three things. One, production value. Two, promises of wealth. And three, rage at some other group. And those are three things that liberal churches tend to eschew. I think that the real goal we should have for our country is a community health and a community prosperity. And also within our faith, I think that's what we're called to, that I'm not doing well unless the people across the other town and the next town and across town and my neighbors are all doing well also. That's the definition of success, is if it's all of us.
And I would argue that the prosperity theology, it enables like selfishness, right? That says it better. Like I deserve what I get if I'm, no matter, because I got rich from it, the ends justify the means. And
so it's an enzyme
from like top down. If that's the value of the church, you've got a big problem, because they're not valuing kindness or compassion or care. They're valuing something that's like, I get what, good things happen to good people. So if good things are happening to you, you have to be good.
I want to get back to conservative churches in Anchorage. It seems they have a much more intense influence on our local politics than any progressive congregation. And I wonder if you can explain why. Why does attending Anchorage Baptist Temple make those people go out and vote as a block?
I don't think it's just attendance. I do think it has to do with a certain type of attendance. There are people who attend secular activities all the time, and that doesn't mean that they fall in line. I think there is a certain type of religious engagement that is top down. And there's a person up front that tells you what to think and tells you what to feel and tells you what to do. And in my experience, that is more likely to be found on the political right than it is on the political left. In my church, we have, for instance, a confirmation class where teenagers are brought in, taught about the faith, and then at the end they join. I always consider it a great success that every year we have at least one kid that chooses not to join at the end, because they have a whole host of reasons. But the fact is, we've made them think about it and we allowed them to choose yes or no. And regardless of what that outcome is in terms of the numbers in the community, it's the right thing to do. Whereas other places are much more really, really driven to bring people in, always growing, always pulling people in. And it develops a mindset of homogeny and going with that group.
Well, we talked a little bit in our last podcast, Matt. Like, what would we require from us for us to try to go viral all the time? Like what part of our soul would we sell if we were always trying to
just
like
publicity?
Yeah. If we're always, exactly. If we're trying to curate content just for it to go viral, like we'd lose a part of ourselves, like in that process. And so I think that's part of it. In my temple, like I can't get a word edgewise without being, essentially criticized or told that I'm wrong. And that's just the way Judaism works, and I think that's beautiful, because we often, I'm often trying to show, like, be skeptical, learn how to navigate sort of what people are saying and what's going on. So, to understand, like, what's the reality on the ground. We've got thousands of years of textual tradition of that happening, called the Talmud, where, we have to work to understand what's going on in our environment. And so it's like I try to tell people, don't be told like what to do, least of all by me. Figure it out, and let's develop tools for you to figure it out. Like, what tools do you need to understand what's going on? So I think that's sort of like what I think my role. Sometimes my role is as sort of, I know, a non like progressive or a non-egalitarian or like non-like evangelical church or whatever, is that at a synagogue, we love arguing, and that process gets you good at becoming skeptical, at trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
That's what Luann just pointed out in the chat, is something along those lines. She says there's a lot of social pressure within those groups to align with those philosophies, or else they will be marginalized. Respectful disagreement is not encouraged, which I think is true. And then I'm just going to read Berta's without even proofreading it. So regarding Matt's comments about young people not choosing to join the church, doesn't that in itself indicate the church is left-leaning? The left, in my view, has tolerance for dissension and independent thinking, rather than demanding that failure to fall in line indicates failure.
Yeah, my initial gut response is to agree with that. I want to be careful. I wonder how people on the right would respond to that, but that rings true to me initially.
Well, and I'll just say, I did tell someone at work just before I was leaving that I was going home to kind of host this event, and I think this came up in the mask testimony, where there was fear that I think the people on the right, the Save Anchorage people, said the other side thinks we're stupid. The other side thinks that we're not intelligent. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we start kind of going down this road, there's this whole thing like, well, we encourage critical thought and critical thinking, and the other side is just like blindly following propaganda. And, like, I'm simplifying it, but I think that's when it kind of gets into this awkward place where I think people, and I will say that I'm like, I don't know how people believe this. I don't know how they're not asking questions. I don't know how they're not, making some decisions for themselves. And then I feel like I'm kind of part of the problem of saying one side is smart and the other side isn't.
Yeah, and so I try not to speak in terms of smart and not. I tend to, this last couple of years, I find myself repeating the phrase, I'm not an expert here. I'm not trying to tell you that vaccines are safe. I'm trying to tell you that that's what the overwhelming majority of experts in the field are saying. Right. I'm not smart enough to know anything about vaccines, but look at all the immunologists out there who are telling us. The overwhelming global majority of all these scientists and doctors are telling us. So it's not that you're unintelligent. It's that you're believing this minority fringe group. And that's
but the question is why choose to believe the minority fringe group?
Exactly.
Right?
And that's then where it becomes that they start slinging all these links at me. Like, look at this guy who's like, talking from his truck about something he read online. He's like, yeah, you're right. That guy thinks vaccines are wrong, but he's not a doctor. He's some dude in a parking lot. And so why are you choosing to believe that guy? Why are you choosing to ignore all the doctors on earth? Come on, Abram, fix this.
Well, once again, it's like back to like, it feels good. What that guy's saying feels good to hear. It feels right. You know what I mean? Like, you're already frustrated. You're pissed off. You don't understand necessarily why, but you are. And this guy in a truck is telling you angrily all the things that you want to hear. Dang, the catharsis there must be wonderful for these individuals. I mean, that's kind of the way that I think it's being experienced, right, Matt? What do you think, Matt?
I heard a great interview with the Dalai Lama where they asked him, if science were to prove that reincarnation is not real, what would you do? And he responded, I would have to change my teaching. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's
so hard though, right? Like Britta, awesome that you can change when you hear new information. I'm really bad at that, like it's hard. Like I often find myself like holding on to this idea that I've had for a while and not wanting to let it go. And like what does it require to like let go of something that you realize is wrong, that you've aligned yourself to like for a long time? Like, I mean, like it requires work. You have a whole religion here that believes in reincarnation, and it's proven not to be a fact, which I doubt that'll ever happen. You got to work with the whole religion to change it too. It's not just Dalai Lama that's got to do it. The Dalai Lama's got to convince, all the other essentially people who believe in it that maybe it's not right, and that's not going to work so well. It's going to take time and effort, and it's going to hurt, and people are going to be, they're going to be angry and frustrated, and so like that's the process of societal change, and it's messy.
That's also why it's hard to get mega churches on that critical thinking side of things, because it's much easier to sell a product. It's much easier to bring people into your church if you say, we have all the answers. And then they come in and they're like, great, and it's all answered. We don't have to think so hard anymore. And it's easy to draw a crowd if you're saying that, but it's a lie.
Okay. So first of all, this is a book club, right? I'm still confused by this.
That's a long story, but we were a group, we started as a group of neighbors who were interested in getting involved in politics in Anchorage, and we didn't know how to do it. So the very first person we invited was an author, Heather Lindy, who was an author in Haines. And so we made a joke that we would call it the East Anchorage Book Club, because that was a very non-offensive, boring title, and that no one would say no to coming to speak to our book club. So far, that's true. Everyone's
I know. Book club really sounds simple, easy, like nothing, not controversial at all. So,
but we haven't read a book yet. Big thanks to Reverend Matthew Schultz and Rabbi Abram Goodstein. Please check out their podcast, What Divines Us. Gratitude to Corey Coolidge for making this podcast listenable. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, rate us, and write a review. In 2 weeks, we will hear from the director of the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, Meg Zolotel, who was recently re-elected to the Anchorage Assembly. Please tune in.